Hi, and welcome to our teen book talk with young adult authors Christy Watson, Rae Knightley, and myself, Lindy Ellison. We'll introduce each other and answer a few questions using examples from our stories. If you need to, you can contact us using the information provided in the description of the video. We'll start with Christy Watson. Christy is an award-winning author of 8 novels for middle grade and young adult readers. She loves entering writing contests and was thrilled to receive Editor's Choice in the CV2 two-day poem contest in 2013, where contestants write a poem using 10 selected words in 48 hours. She also regularly participates in the Poetry Marathon in June, doing the half marathon, where she writes 12 poems to 12 prompts in 12 hours. She also volunteers at the Surrey International Writers Conference and the Beach House Theatre. Christy, what kind of research did you do to write on cue and make it authentic for middle grade and young adult readers?
Oh, well, thank you, Lindy, for that wonderful introduction and for inviting me to this discussion. To answer the question, all of my currents and Lorimer Side Street books are realistic fiction, meaning they're stories that are pertinent to young people and are rooted in reality. So it's important that my characters and their stories are authentic. Being a recently retired teacher of students in all grades helped me immensely as I was able to interact with youth of that age. But if you aren't a teacher as well as a writer, what you can do is ride public transit during school hours if you're brave, or sit on a park bench at lunchtime near a school, or go to a food court in the mall and listen in on student conversations. Hearing their way of speaking and what they talk about is important. It's what I call on-the-job research. Some of my other research for On Cue was also on the job, where I interacted with students who had autism in a variety of settings. Toby, my secondary character, is a collective of character traits from the wonderful youth I've met and worked with over my career. Interestingly, the other day on Twitter, a mom of an autistic youth posted how her son's school added a special part just for him in their Shakespearean play, where he was able to share facts about Elizabethan England. His mom says his superpower is knowing a lot of facts. My character Toby has a superpower too. He memorizes things easily and ends up being a prompter for A Midsummer Night's Dream, where he feeds the actors their lines when they forget them. His superpower even inspired my title. So it was cool to learn that a real-life situation is so close to one I made up for the story. Perhaps that means I was also close with getting the realistic and authentic part right. The other research I did pre-writing happened naturally when my stepson was part of the Young Shakespeareans program at Bard on the Beach in Vancouver, BC. This allowed me a real-life window into what the young actors do for games and to prepare we're writing about can also be helpful if you're able to do it. But if not, reading about it and researching it are also good ways into the world and characters you're creating. So some of the extra research I do is I read popular YA books in my genre and across genres so that I know what the target audience is craving and what the market needs.
Wow, that's a lot of research. You can tell you really would like your stories to be real for people, and obviously that shows. So why did you choose to write realistic fiction? And does first-person point of view make it more realistic to the readers? And then there must be some challenges writing for this market.
Right, thanks, Lindy. When I was first deciding that I wanted to be an author as a teen, I knew it was partly because I loved books, but I also happened to need realistic fiction myself because of things that were happening in my life. And so there weren't a lot of books back then that we would have called realistic fiction, but I was surprised that I managed to find a good number of them, and I gobbled them up. One of my favorite authors when I was in my teens was Robert Cormier, and he wrote what we call now realistic fiction. His books were gripping, and I loved his writing style. He also wrote in first person, and it brought me right into the thick of the story. It used to make me feel like I was a part of the book. And I think his writing style imprinted on me, and that's how I came to do the kinds of books that I do now. But I also think there's an equally important reason, and that's because of the youth I worked with through my teaching career. They were young people who didn't always see themselves represented in books or found certain stories too challenging. So I chose to write high-low fiction to appeal to this readership. This means books that are high interest but have low reading levels, making them accessible to readers of all skill levels. They're also first-person point of view and what we call realistic fiction. But some of the challenges in writing in first person is that your character has to be present for everything that happens. You can't write over here, and there were a few times in On Cue where the scene called for things to happen for Toby. But I could only do that if his sister, our narrator, Randy, who was the main character, was also present. It can mean that some reviewers of our books might not be even as keen on the main character, because what happens with first person is it lets you hear the inner thoughts of your characters, and they're teens, and it's their real thoughts and messages. And so, wanting my story to be authentic, that meant having Randy sometimes say things that were inside her head and were real for her, but were not things she would ever have said out loud or around other people. I couldn't sugarcoat her feelings, or the scenes wouldn't have been as impactful, and they definitely wouldn't have resonated with the target audience. So taking the target audience into consideration means sometimes making hard choices for how the character is portrayed before their story arc is complete. So there aren't a lot of publishers out there doing high-low books, and because my target audience is smaller, it meant that my books won't sell as well in the general market. But I know I made the right decision to write these kinds of books. Many young people in grades 5 to 9 have told me that my books are the first ones they ever finished reading. Others say they feel like they were one of the characters in the story, and in most of the letters that I receive from young people, the students are asking for a sequel or if I could make it into a movie. So I guess that says, yes, I am reaching the intended audience. So I'm especially appreciative of our session today, Lyndi, because On Cue just got released 2 days ago in a new ultra readable format. So the timing for this session was perfect. So thank you. All right, so I am now excited to do our introduction of our next wonderful speaker for today, and that is, of course, Rae Lyndi. And while I'm doing this, Rae, you might want to unmute. Rae is an award-winning author, Amazon best-selling author of science fiction novels for middle grade and young adults. Her latest release, The Knowledge Seeker, is a dystopian story about a 16-year-old boy who lives 600 years into the future and is tasked with saving what remains of 21st century knowledge. Rae lives in Vancouver on the western coast of Canada with her husband, 2 children, and a jealous cat. So, Rae, my first question for you is, who is the Knowledge Seeker dedicated to and why?
Thank you very much for the question, Christy, and thank you, Lyndi, for having me here with you. It's great to share the screen with you. So actually, the Knowledge Seeker is dedicated to the enlightened people. I don't know if you can read that, but the book is dedicated to the enlightened people. And in this story, the enlightened people are people who lived in the 21st century, meaning us. So I'm dedicating this book to us, to our generation, to the people living today. So the reason I did this was because in the Knowledge Seeker, we're living 600 years into the future, and civilization as we know it has disappeared. So all the knowledge and all the technology that we are used to has vanished. The internet and just imagine living without the internet again, without cars, without airplanes, spaceships and all that. So this is a kind of reminder of all the good things we've achieved in the 21st century. So, I mean, even though times may be hard right now, things aren't easy, and the world is faced with constant challenges and problems. And yet I thought we deserved a pat on the back for all the things that we as humans have invented. We can fly, we can send objects into space, we've walked on the moon, we have access to mountains of knowledge through the internet, and we have invented democracy and laws, vaccines, medicine. So we're not perfect, but everything good that we have created are things that we can build on to build a brighter future. So we tend to focus on a lot of bad things, all the bad things you read in the news. But we do still get some things right. And I wanted to acknowledge that. And so the Knowledge Seeker is a reminder of what the world would be like without all these wonderful inventions. And I hope that it will make people aware that we should also be grateful for all the wonderful things we have access to.
Absolutely, a celebration of sorts to keep us on that track. And I know I enjoyed reading it immensely. So thank you, Rae. Second question I have for you today is, does everyone deserve access to all knowledge?
Well, that's actually the question that started it all. Should we all have access to all knowledge? Again, we have access to the internet and you can probably find everything on there. But even so, there are different layers of knowledge within the internet. There's a dark web, and and then there's dangerous knowledge too, So what happened was that I had just read an article about an elderly woman in her 80s. Her name was Melita Norwood, and her story is told in the movie Red Joan, I'm not sure. She had been sitting quietly at home in her home in the UK, when suddenly the police swarmed her house and arrested her. And I mean, this woman was in her 80s. And it turned out that she was accused of spying for the Russians during the Cold War. And it turns out that she had been working alongside British scientists on developing the nuclear bomb. But when she realized the danger of this weapon, she felt that it was dangerous for a single world power to have exclusive use of this knowledge. She felt it was dangerous for a single world power with a single world power having access to this knowledge, this world power could hold the world hostage. So she shared the blueprints with the Russians because she thought it was safer to have different opposing powers have this knowledge to balance things out. So I thought the story of this elderly woman was fascinating, And it made me think of the internet and how too much knowledge and information can tip the balance the other way, because we're also swarmed with fake news and disinformation. So where's the limit? So do we all deserve all knowledge? Should we decide what to make public and what shouldn't be made public? And my main character in The Knowledge Seeker has his opinion about this, and he says, knowledge must belong to all or to none. So I thought there was an interesting debate to be held there. If we shouldn't all have access to all knowledge, then who would decide who gets what knowledge? I mean, it's a very complex question. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for the questions, Christy. So I would like to head over to Lyndi. I think, and my cat is here. My jealous cat is here, so just a warning. So Lindy Ellison, as a tween, Lyndi walked miles to borrow books from the bookmobile and found quiet places to read them. Now she writes stories for young readers and helps other writers with their writing projects. A retired high school teacher, mother of 3 adult children, and community youth volunteer, Lyndi moved with her husband to Panama, where she hosts writing workshops, tours, and retreats. Oh my goodness, retreats in nature and at Tranquilo Retreat. Often ideas come to her as she walks the beach and hikes in the mountains. While stargazing around a campfire, many children and teens shared the grief they carried. Lyndi was struck by how challenging it is to help youth who grieve and was inspired to write the Summer Triangle Trilogy. So Lyndi, how does Greek mythology play into your stories?
Well, my trilogy explores myth the way I would describe it as kind of retold societal or cultural stories. And often these stories have philosophical lessons or values, and quite often they're symbolic of our own human experience. I remember reading how Madeleine L'Engle suggested that stories make us more alive, more human, more courageous, more loving. And this is certainly true for Gloria, the female protagonist in the Summer Triangle Trilogy. She interprets her life circumstances through Greek myths and other stories like Shakespeare and nursery rhymes. Seeing life through this storytelling lens provides this counterpart to Jace. Now he's her male astronomy mathematician rival. And so this often creates conflict between them. And they need to work through this if they're going to rescue alien children, fight terrifying foes, and then find their way home. Each story in the trilogy, The Lines Between Our Stars, The Bridges Between Us, and The Clashing of Our Worlds, is set on an exoplanet near one of the bright stars in the Summer Triangle asterism. And each of these stars is part of a constellation with its own Greek myth, and these play into the stories. In book 1, Draco, the female version of the constellation Draco, which is a dragon snake, asks Jace and Gloria to travel light years from home to rescue her son. Now, as you can imagine, on this planet, the teens are trying to help, but they encounter increasingly difficult and ultimately life-threatening challenges. As they trek on a dry planet, Gloria shares with Jace the story of Orpheus's harp and his attempted rescue of Eurydice from the underworld. And she writes a song to the music she claims she can hear. Both Orpheus's story and music and her song factor into how Gloria and Jace attempt to thwart Serpens, the snake who holds life forms hostage. If you read The Lines Between the Stars, you'll find out if using Lyra's music and Gloria's words are enough to befuddle their enemy. In book 3, The Clashing of Our Worlds, Jace and Gloria interact with many Greek mythological characters: the civilization-destroying centaurs, the peace-loving satyrs, and tricky mermaids, who all raise the stakes. Jace and Gloria face three enemies who converge on a peaceful tribe. One of them, the Greek character known as Typhon, is the father of monsters. Now, to come up with a solution on how to combat these enemies without the use of weapons, and also staying true to the tribe's peacemaking culture, I free wrote a section about Typhon ranting on Zeus. And it was through this free write that I found the solution for defeating the enemy, and they're expressed in Typhon's rants. Getting back to lingo, she suggests that we lose our myths. When we lose our myths, we lose our place in the world. This is certainly the case for Gloria, and thus the people in her life, as myths help her make sense of her world.
That's fantastic, Lindy. I absolutely loved reading your books. And I have another question. Why is learning to communicate to the point of understanding a theme in your trilogy?
Well, even though communicating well is something I try to do, I find uncommunication or miscommunication can creep in and sometimes provoke a disagreement. And so I was asking, why is communicating well so hard to do? I gave this issue to my teen protagonists, one who views life through an artsy literary lens, and the other this creative mathematical lens. And I placed them in cultures on planets that are foreign to them. They're also dealing with grief, one, the death of her father, and the other, the death of his sibling. And both the way they see things and their grief affects their emotions, which determines their communication, choices, and actions. Add a loss of communication with the people they love on Earth, and they need to figure out how to save an alien and be able to understand one another. So Draca, the dragon snake, raises this issue of communicating to the point of understanding. It's only when the teens listen to one another and to those living in other cultures that they begin to understand and appreciate one another. And as they gain understanding, they're able to apply it to their challenges. An example of how this plays out in the clashing of our worlds is in the death rituals of the Pan tribe. Jace believes their practice of placing their dead children in rucksacks and hanging them in trees is leaving a trail for their enemy to follow. He wants the Pans to change their practice and bury their children, at least temporarily. He suggests that once they defeat their foe, they can return, unbury their children, and practice their usual cultural ritual. But for the Pan, burying their children means the wind won't be able to carry them to a good afterlife. While Jace listens to their beliefs, he doesn't understand how an afterlife practice is more important than protecting their children who are alive, something he was unable to do for his baby sister. So when he tries to resolve this on his own, instead of getting rid of the Pan's enemy, Jace's choice leads another enemy to the tribe. So how the teens communicate plays out in all of their relationships, as it does in our lives. They need to learn to work at listening, considering, and valuing the perspectives of others. And when we do this, we learn and grow. And just like the teens in these stories, our lives are enriched. So in many ways, for me, writing stories for young adults became about communication, learning, and growing. So
Fantastic.
I always delighted when I speak with the two of you or read your stories, how there are little glimmers of the thinking that overlap. And so, this idea of communication, and knowledge comes up in your books, Rae. But you also have a middle grade series. Can you just introduce us to that?
For sure, Lindy. So I have written a science fiction adventure series called The Alien Skill series. And this is a story about a 12-year-old boy called Ben Archer, who witnesses the fall of the crash of UFOs, and he comes into contact with aliens, and he's also entrusted with an alien superpower, and he has to go on the run from the government and from some evil aliens. And I added, this is mostly an adventure story, just a fun read, but I do have an underlying message where Ben Archer learns to respect the environment, and he starts realizing all the things we're doing to the planet, and he wants to try and find a balance between the way humans treat the environment and the natural world. So he has a very big task ahead.
And I was just going to jump in for a second because one, of course, I loved all of your 3 books as well, Lyndi. And I was just thinking, Rae, with yours, that notion of communication that you were just speaking of, Lyndi, also comes clearly out in the Ben Archer stories, because he can communicate or learns to communicate differently with others. I won't give too many spoilers away.
That's right.
But I think that is a really important thing. And for sure, in my book On Cue, main character Randy loves her brother Toby, but she also is struggling to find time for herself as a new teenager in high school. And so learning to communicate her needs, wishes, wants, and desires with her mom is something that she learns to do as the story progresses.
Now, Christy, do you have a favorite book or a favorite character? I'm sure you love them all, but sometimes there's one that kind of rises up a little bit to the surface and just really, resonates with your heart. Do you have one of those?
Well, thank you. And for sure, Toby has been one of those all along. He's a lovely character. But I've just finished writing the 3rd book in a fantasy trilogy for young adults. And Saturnia, thank you. Saturnia is a winged person from the moth people line. And she has fast become a new favorite for me. She has a lot of trials, but she's a really strong young lady. And so I think she's kind of edged her way in right now as one of my favorites.
Lyndi, I would like to find out if you have any future projects for us.
Oh, well, yes, I am writing the first draft of the 2nd trilogy. So there isn't only a summer triangle in the sky and asterism, but there's also a winter triangle. And the new trilogy will have a new story arc, but I'm exploring new worlds, a new concern, but still very deeply rooted concern. And it is still Jace and Gloria who are pushing one another and challenging one another. And hopefully by the end of the books, we'll see some great character development there. Thank you for
Fantastic.
asking.
Yeah.
Now
Looking forward to it.
And how about you? Have you got something new?
Yes, I'm working on a new series as well. It's called The Lost Space Treasure. And this is borderline young adult, older, middle grade. And this is a story about a legendary treasure lost in space, and who is going to get to it first. And my main character is the key to the treasure.
Well, that sounds great. I can see we are going to have to meet again because we have more stories that we're going to need to talk about. Now, if you're listening in, you can find information on how to purchase our books in the contact information in the description. Please drop us a review to let us know what you think. We value our readers and we are listening, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you for joining me on Teen Book Talk today. It was a joy to discuss young adult books with you.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Thanks for hosting us. And I look forward to all your questions. And I certainly look forward to reading your future books, Christy and Lindy. So I hope to see you very soon.
And ditto all of those comments as well. And just thanks to everyone who tunes in.
Thank you, everyone.